Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace. So recently I was able to get my hands on a test roll of Lucky Color 200, which is a brand new color negative film coming out of China. And I decided to head out and shoot it alongside a roll of Kodak Gold over a couple of days to put together this first look video where we see how this film performs and also how it compares to what I assume will be one of its closest competitors on the market. And I gotta say, when I first heard the announcement, I was very curious to see what this would be like, just because Lucky Film has been around for a very long time. At one point, they were a pretty big player in the film production market. So this isn't a brand new company starting from scratch with kind of no previous experience or knowledge. And unfortunately, I was only able to get the one roll of this film. I couldn't go too in depth with my testing, but I hope at the very least, these results I'm going to show you today give you a feel of what you can expect from this new film. So we'll start quickly by doing just a brief overview of who Lucky is if you're not familiar. So Lucky Film has been around since the late 1950s when they were making black and white and motion picture film. And in the 80s and 90s, they started color production. They were the biggest player in the Chinese film market, and then they slowly worked their way into the North American market and actually formed a partnership with Kodak in the early 2000s, which helped bring them new technologies and a new emulsion coating line. But unfortunately, in 2012, they closed, and I'm assuming this was due to just the popularity of digital and with film dying out. So this film is really kind of their re-entry into the market again, starting to make film, reinvesting in processes and machinery. And like I said, it's exciting that this is a company with a lot of previous history and know-how, and you think they would be a good bet to be able to get something like this right. And apparently this is going to be available in 120. I would love to see it in sheet film as well, and according to their website, they're currently in production, so this should be available worldwide pretty soon. As for pricing, I haven't come across anything yet, but I will be very curious how the price of this stacks up against something like Kodak Gold, because I think that's really going to determine how popular this ends up being. So when I got this film, I loaded up in my Contax RTS2 and shot it over 2 separate days, but like I said, I brought along a roll of Kodak Gold, loaded that into a Canon EOS 30, and shot both of these films side by side with the exact same settings. So we're going to look at those comparisons shortly, but we're going to start first by specifically just looking at the Lucky Color 200. So what I noticed right away when I first scanned this film is that it definitely has its own unique characteristics, but compared to a lot of the other new color negative films I've tested over the past couple months, this one is probably the most tame or most neutral, but certainly not perfect. For the most part, the colors are pretty nice. The reds can be quite punchy. I liked how the greens came across as well. And there were a bunch of images where I actually did really enjoy the look. I would say it's quite a different film to others on the market right now, but it doesn't have some like crazy experimental, super strong feel to it. It just kind of looked like a consumer color negative film, which is a good thing. I would say the biggest kind of standout thing I noticed is when I was scanning these and converting them, the images had a very strong red cast, almost every single one. And all of these images we're looking at, I scanned on my Fuji Frontier, and almost always I had to pull a ton of red out by adding cyan. And as a result, that introduced a lot of kind of blue or cyan into the highlights specifically, while still having this kind of overall red cast in the image. And I did take some frames and scan them on my camera scanning setup and converted with Negative Lab Pro, and I'll show you those results after, but I'll say right now that I noticed pretty much the exact same characteristics. So I'd say that's kind of the defining feature that I noticed with this film, is fairly neutral colors, but with an overall red and cyan cast still visible. There were some images which felt better than others and that felt overall fairly neutral, but I would say for the most part, this film took some more work to correct than normal and didn't end up kind of as clean or as neutral as something like Kodak Gold. Shadow and highlight detail looked pretty good as well, but just a bit behind the Kodak results. The shadows looked a bit more flat and the highlights a little washed out at times. There were some defects with this film that I wanted to point out. These are things that I'm fairly confident will be cleaned up for the final production run, just because I was told that these test rolls were actually hand-coded, and obviously the production run is going to be done on machinery. But in all of the images, I noticed these tiny little dots or kind of imperfections in the emulsion, which I had to go around and clone out. But then also there were a number of images where specifically kind of in the sky areas, there was like this orange or red cast that was bleeding in from the edges, and this was apparent regardless of the scanning method that I used. So again, something I wanted to point out, but things that I would hope and do feel fairly confident would be cleaned up for the final production run of this film. Okay, so next up we're going to take a look at the comparisons against Gold, but just have to take a quick break here to talk about the sponsor today, which is Squarespace. So as a photographer, one of the most important things for me is having a website, and over the years I've tried all sorts of different methods, but for the past few years I've been using Squarespace and have absolutely loved the professional results I get and also how easy it is to use. So if you're starting from scratch and have no experience, they have a number of very nice templates to choose from, or something like their blueprint builder, which allows you to build a professional looking website in just minutes. But I also love all of the different features and the flexibility it gives me. I can add things like an online store to sell books and prints. I can easily update or add new galleries and use it to sequence photos and add collections as I shoot them. And it also has things like easy drag and drop page customization and the ability to add in videos, which is what I did for one of my pages to share my short films. So check out squarespace.com today, sign up for a free trial, test it out, and when you're ready to launch, you can use my link below to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain. Okay, so as mentioned, I shot a roll of Kodak Gold alongside Lucky Color 200. And, Kodak Gold has been around forever. It's like a fine-tuned production film. It's one that I absolutely love as well. So I wasn't expecting Lucky to be as good, but I think it's important to see how these differ, as I think Gold is going to be one of the main competitors to this film. So right away, I'll say that the roll of Kodak Gold scanned and converted way easier on the Frontier with often no adjustments needed whatsoever. And the results are definitely more neutral, a little bit warmer, and almost just look good right away. And when we put the two side by side, I'll say that the Gold's shadows and highlights feel much cleaner, like the film has more range to it. Whereas Lucky, as mentioned, the shadows feel a little flat and the highlights a little bit washed out. And with the Lucky film, specifically with the highlights, maybe the best way I could describe it is they kind of look like a color negative film that's been overexposed way too much, where the highlights get a bit flat and almost a bit of a cast to them. So the two films definitely have their own kind of unique look to them, and personally I much prefer Kodak Gold. That being said, the longer I looked at the images side by side, I did start to become more impressed by Lucky Color and noticed that the colors themselves actually aren't that far off from Gold. If you say, look at the greens and reds, there is this resemblance between the two. So really, I'd say with the Lucky film, the biggest difference is just that kind of red/cyan cast overall, and maybe a little less performance when it comes to shadow and highlight detail. Whereas Gold is just overall a very flexible film that converts and looks good almost right away, especially when converting with something like the Frontier. So it'd be great to see if we get some improvements with this film moving forward in the future, clean some of those things up, maybe make it just a little bit more neutral, because as it is right now, I'd say it's showing quite a bit of potential. But I will say the thing that impressed me the most is when it comes to grain and sharpness. So side by side, both of these films performed almost identical when you look at the images at 100%. The Lucky film was nice and sharp, and the grain looked almost the same as the results from the Kodak Gold. So this was really nice to see with, a brand new film entering the market, because again, going back to say something like Harmon's Phoenix, grain was an issue and so was sharpness. Getting better with the second version, but to see results like this from the first version of this film, I'd say is very promising. So as mentioned, I actually went and scanned a few of the frames with my camera scanning setup here at home and converted with Negative Lab Pro afterwards, just to give you an idea of what you can expect if you're going to be scanning this film at home. And the results were actually quite similar to what I experienced using the Frontier. So right away during conversion, I noticed that the camera scans had that exact same strong red cast, which had to be corrected out. And afterwards, as expected, had that same kind of cyan/red look to them. The images were a bit softer than the Frontier, which is typically the case with the Frontier being quite a contrasty scanner. And the colors were also a bit punchier as well with the camera scans. But overall, the two conversion processes yielded very similar results. So regardless of how you scan this film, it's going to take a little bit of work, but you're probably going to get, very similar final images regardless of the method, at least between the two that I tried. So overall, fairly impressed with this film. It's not perfect, but overall it did pretty well. And I think the one thing that's become apparent very quickly, and also isn't that surprising, is just that making a new color film is a fairly difficult and time-intensive process. So to see performance like this out of, this first film from Lucky, I think is a huge positive. Again, comparing it to something like Harman's Phoenix, that is a film that is very much in progress. It's getting better, but to me, it feels much more kind of experimental. It's still quite a strong look, whereas even though this isn't a Kodak Gold, it feels like it's much more kind of shootable on a consistent day-to-day basis. But I think the biggest thing, like I said, is going to be the price. I'll be very curious to see what that is, because if this, say, is the same price or very close to something like Kodak Gold, I know what I would choose. It would be gold in, a second. But if this, say here in the UK, is a few pounds cheaper than gold, then I think it becomes a very attractive option, especially, if you're someone who likes a film that has maybe a little bit more of a look to it. But anyways, regardless, it's exciting to have another option on the market, and I am excited to see where this goes. And it's nice to have a company like Lucky making film again, because I think this is one where we'll see improvements and hopefully new products on a fairly consistent and quick basis. So excited to see where this goes. But anyways, that's going to wrap up this video. Hope you enjoyed this look at Lucky's Color 200 film, and thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon.